Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 4 and the finale of my Revell N1 Starfighter build from the Mandalorian. I am finishing up the ship on this build, including getting the figures painted and modified and some other detailing that I have to do, getting all the sub-assemblies all put together, and then getting it onto the base that I completed in my last video. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so I'm working on the bottom of the hull, and the assembly of this kit you have to do in a certain order, as I showed earlier with things like the wings and the engines and things like that. So it can be a little tricky. What they recommend is the tricky part here is this back section. This is actually 3 parts. Let me show you the instructions. All right, so you have 3 parts that go to this back spine. You have the main piece, which actually has to go into the kit, and then you have this this part that looks like a blade, and then you have this other fragile part on top. Those little other pieces are decals. Okay, so a 3-part section. So they recommend, let me move this a second here, sorry. They recommend gluing it onto the top. This is upside down. Here's the bottom, which is this. They recommend attaching the main part onto the top, which I've shown before in my photos, and I'll show you why. Then they recommend, with it attached, to glue these on, but that's tricky because then you're painting it all together when in reality I already painted the top, so I don't want to do that. So here's the main issue, and it's not really that much of an issue. So where that part goes into the top, you have that little pin which goes into that little tab coming out of the bottom, the back. Sorry, the air compressor. And then you have these 2 little side pieces that it folds into. Sorry about that. Sorry, air compressor. So what I managed to do, when I was taking photos earlier, I just took that part and I placed it on that tab, and I gently moved it over top of these 2 extensions because it fits snugly over top of those. That's the only part that's a problem. So what I decided was to go ahead and glue it onto the bottom. I can still put this in, get that pin into this hole, and maneuver those little tabs underneath these 2 side pieces. You just have to be gentle. Just move like one at a time and it clicks into place. So I think that's the better way to go. What I did then was, because here's the problem. This blade piece has to glue into the bottom hull and glue onto this piece here. So unless I wanted to glue the whole bottom onto the ship and then glue these pieces on, but that's not going to work right unless I wait to paint them later, which I don't want to do. So I went ahead and glued everything in place. So I have all 3 pieces glued onto the bottom hull. The back tail spine is complete, but it's integral to the bottom of the hull. So this a little bit of maneuvering, I can get this glued in. I can get this put into the top hull after I paint it. And the thing is that those little tabs go underneath this piece. So if a little bit of paint gets rubbed off on those, it's no big deal. You're not going to see it. It's not really going to affect the outer part. But if I get a little bit of rubbing off of the paint, I can always fix it up. All right. So that's on there. And I like the 3-part connections. It makes it nice and straight and sturdy. So this piece is ready to go. I taped off a little bit of this area where the engine is going to glue in because I didn't want to have to glue a painted part, you know, plastic part to paint. So that way I can leave some of the surface clean, but not a big deal. I also taped off the aluminum tube because I don't want that to be too much cake with paint, especially not silver or aluminum. I'm going to end up putting the sand material on that when I'm done. All right, and this is all one color other than the spine, of course, which is going to be a little bit different colors. And this little area, this little grill part that's exposed, I'm going to make that gunmetal. But you're really not going to see much of that. This whole ship's going to be angled, so you're not going to really see it. Okay, so that's the route that I'm going to take. That way this can all be painted. And again, this is just going to be the aluminum and then the oily steel speckled over it in order to give it that worn look like the top. I'm not going to do any special detailing other than that. I might do a little bit of weathering in this little, whatever that's supposed to be, torpedo tube or something. And of course, I'm going to look at the spine and see what colors that is and go with that. They seem to show a darker color, maybe a gray or something. We'll see. But that's going to be a different color, just like the engine has some scorching and engine grease and that kind of thing. So, all right. So I'm ready to go ahead and get this painted, and then we'll get this ready to go. All right, so I began working on the figures to put into the cockpit. So here's the cockpit. I did go ahead and take off the shrink tubing on the wiring, and I filtered it down through the bottom. I have to get it stripped and rewired in again. Try to get that one little yellow light working again. But mainly just get rid of the wiring that's in the way of this whole cockpit assembly fitting into the ship, which was giving me some issues. So I'll get with that in a moment. So I had a few requests from other modelers building this kit for me to send them or 3D print some of these figures for them, since they don't have a 3D printer. And so I did that. Sent a couple out. One set to Norway, one set to Canada. I'm working on another set to go out to Great Britain. Just the figures. So these original figures came with the 3D printed ship that I made from Gambody. Here's the original 3D printed kit. It's not a bad little kit. It's got a lot of inaccuracies, of course, but not really that terrible, to be honest, for, you know, having nothing there originally. The bottom's not on it, and Mando's falling out because the bottom's on the base part. But I wanted to try to take a look and get an idea on the figure. So the gentleman that I sent the figures to in Canada had wrote back that he had gotten them. So he's trying to make some comparisons. It's very tricky, because if you take just a 1/24 scale figure and you try to compare it to what I printed, it's not the right size. It doesn't look right. Because their figure was designed, let me get that real quick and I'll show you. All right, so here's the kit figure. I won't tell you what that pose looks like. It looks terrible. But the body looks like crap. Very little detail, too skinny, too thin. And he's kind of in a 90-degree pose. And I was talking to the other person because his concern was that the head on this figure with a much accurate body is too small compared to the kit. I think the whole figure is too small. But the problem is that the way this kit is designed, I had to cut off his feet as well to fit in there, but there is no room on either side of him to fit in that cockpit. And really, if you look at it, if I cut off his feet so he does go down inside, he's down in there too low. He does look too small. But if I made him a bigger figure, he's not going to fit side to side. The length isn't a problem because I can cut the feet off. You're not going to see the feet. They go into the controls. But that's an issue. So what we were talking about is in the show, he's basically sitting his legs straight out flat. And he's almost like sitting on the bottom of the hull in this ship. It's just a prop, obviously. It's not a real spaceship. But there really would not be a ton of room in that cockpit for him to sit. And have much room to move around or do anything. Let alone, and somebody else asked this question, have any kind of other compartments that go up to the bubble that Grogu climbs through and don't get me started. But anyway, so what they ended up doing with the kit part is they made the body way out of proportion with the head. Put it in a really goofy looking pose so that his helmet would look right, because you're only really going to see mostly the helmet sticking up at the top, and you'll see his arms and other things. So what I decided to do and what he is going to do is I took the kit helmet, which actually is more accurate as well, and I cut off the helmet for the figure, this other figure. I had printed a couple different ones, and glued it on there. So it's a little out of proportion with the body now, but at least when it's in there, it's going to look right, and it's going to look accurate to the scale. And actually, he can go down in there further. There we go. He did all on the whole zone. There you go. His head meets up with the headrest. It looks correct. It looks accurate. The body fits in the cockpit. And the main part that you're going to see, which is the head, the helmet, under the canopy, looks correct. So I think I'm going to take that route. And what I'm also thinking of doing is tilting him forward a little bit. And what I'll probably do is fashion a bigger seat cushion that he's sitting on, so he's not touching the headrest. So he'll be further ahead. Sort of like this one here. He's not touching the headrest. He's moving forward. And his head is pretty much touching the canopy. So, but there was a seat in there too, you can see, that this 3D print came with. And this is the figure that was printed in scale with the ship. I didn't print it full size, but I printed him the same size, the right size for the ship. But again, this has some imperfections in it. It's not a perfect version or accurate version. So I think that's what I'm going to do. In addition, so the kit figure has his arms extended out, and it has these parts that are the controls, way out of proportion as well. They look ridiculous. But they go into the control panel in the front. There are some slots that they go into. You can kind of see them down in there. Those little notches. So if I move him a little forward, he'll be closer to that. And then what I thought I would do is take some steel rod or some plastic rod and just drill holes into the ends of these controls and just run them into the control panel, with the idea that he's pulling back on it, because that's what it is. He pulls back on it. I think there's two different rods on them, so he's pulling back on them in order to accelerate the ship. So I think that's the route that I'm going to take as far as the kit helmet onto the more accurate body for Mando. And then I started to paint the first one, and I'm using Alclads, so I'm using their gloss black, and then I'm using stainless steel, which is a darker looking metallic, so it looks closer to the Beskar than if I use chrome or something like that. So at first I was thinking, well, you know, I don't have to do his helmet and his shoulder pads. And then I started looking more. It's like, no, in his chest and his whole forearms and his whole left thigh and part of his, yeah. So I figured I'll just paint the whole thing with the Alclad. And then it's much easier to go back in and just paint the brown and like his little bit of sleeve there, his little bit of chest part that's showing right there. His right leg. And again, a lot of these you're not even going to see because they're going to be inside the ship. The other part of his leg that's not surrounded by that. So far, in his gloves, far easier to do the whole Alclad over the whole thing. I didn't really do it in the back because the cape is brown. So I'll do that separate. And then just come back in and paint the other parts that are going to be a different color. One other thing I did was I decided on the larger version of Grogu, and I want him in the dome. So the way this kit works is you have this piece. This goes in from the inside and clicks up inside of it. And then there are two little holes, as you can see, where the really crappy looking figure that the kit provides. Let me get that because I just think it's ridiculous. I'm sorry. This ridiculous thing. What in the world? I mean, seriously, they made no attempt. Look at that. Even the back, even his head. He looks like E.T. for God's sakes. What is going on? That head is way out of proportion. The pose is ridiculous. Yeah, that's a really crappy looking figure. So, yeah, absolutely not using that. So what I decided to do, the easiest way, was I took some epoxy sculpt and I made a couple layers. I had pressed some texture in with a piece of material that I had, but it didn't really last as much. It's not bad. But make it look like it's some kind of a blanket or pillow or something in there that he's sitting on. And then when I put him up inside the kit, he's in the right position in the dome. And plus, it's easy now for me to just paint him. I have a nice little holder for him. So I'll get him painted, and he'll be ready to go in the kit as well. On the inside of that dome cylinder, below the clear dome, it's rounded. I might put some styrene along that and add a little bit of detail. Who knows? I mean, we'll see. Probably nothing major. There's not going to be any light inside of this or any other lights other than the ones I put in the cockpit. You'll be able to see him pretty visibly. He's up inside the dome, so it's pretty cool. All right, so let me go ahead and work on these. I'm going to go ahead and do the same with this one, with the Alclads. And then once it's dry, I'll go ahead and paint the other parts that I want to be the browns and other things. And you can paint over the Alclads, it's not a problem, especially when I'm using the flat paints. So, all right. All right, so quite a lot of paints and some weathering powders, tiny little brushes. In addition to the weathering brushes I got from Artify, I also picked up a little set of some very nice brushes, like this little tiny tipped one. This one's kind of a fantail, which I've been using. Very, very helpful, very nice. Definitely recommend them. Very good brushes. I'll go over those at some other point and show you all the brushes. But I got Mando painted. I got Grogu painted. And so initially, as I talked about, I went over him with the Alclads first. And then I just went back in and painted different browns and things like that onto him. So I tried to get some different layering on him. You can see his cape. His arm, his little, whatever those are on his wrists with the little blue triangle. Very super tiny. you're not really going to see a lot of the things down below. You're only going to see really like his chest and his helmet, of course. Sorry. What I also did was I drilled some holes into those controls in his hands. And I glued in some styrene rod to line them up and painted them aluminum. And they'll fit into the ship, and they go up and meet the control panel. So it looks like he's pulling them back, and there really are some kind of rods on them in the actual show. When he pulls back on those handles, it pulls back on some kind of rods that control the ship. So, okay. You got his little belt painted. You got the different metallics. All right. I did use the decal for his, sorry for the lighting, for the black part of his helmet, but didn't really like it much. It was really hard to put on. Ended up going back over it with some black and some gloss to give it more of the black shine. Okay, show you him in the cockpit here in a moment. Then Grogu, I painted some green and brown on the epoxy sculpt parts that I made. I got some different colors on him. After I did his eyes with the black, I went over with some clear gloss to make them look shiny. I think he turned out pretty good for being such a tiny, tiny little figure. A little bit of pink in his ears. I tried some little bit of mottling of some different greens onto his head to give him some character. All right, very cool. All right, let me get and put these in the ship, and I'll show you what they're going to look like. All right, so I did a little modification in the cockpit, as I was mentioning. I just cut out some styrene sheet. You can see it back in there. It's the part that extends out in front of the actual seat back that the kit has. It just pushes him forward just a little bit, so he's not on the headrest. He's leaning forward, and his and the two control yokes line up. So now when I put him in, sorry, he's sitting up a little bit, which is what I wanted. And you can see how those aluminum rods match up with the control panel. All right, so very cool. And I did run the wires down through and get them hooked up so I can turn those on. Show you how that's going to look. You'll get some of the blue reflecting off of his metallics, of course. The lights on the side. Still didn't get that little yellow light to work, but I'm not worrying about it. Okay. All right. Let me show you Grogu up inside of the dome. All right, so you can see how this piece fits inside. It's molded just right and has the 3 pin connectors to go right up in there, only one way. Let me flip it over for you. I have to hold it in place because I don't want it to fall out. I'm not ready to glue it in just yet. Pretty sweet. So he's nicely positioned in the dome. He does not have the little metal ball in his hand. I'll think about it. I might just fashion something easy to throw in his hand. Because early on when we see the ship, he's hitting it onto the dome. So he'll launch the ship. Or to accelerate the ship. Because Grogu likes when he does it. He's like, no, I'm not doing it again. All right, pretty cool. Pretty cool. Really like how he turned out. Certainly looks pretty sweet. And you can see quite a bit of him. And like I was saying, that inside of that ring in there, I might just fashion some kind of styrene to give it some detail, but you don't really see much of it, but we'll see. All right, but they're looking pretty cool. All right, so I finished up the canopy. I used a material called bare metal foil. Right here. Matte aluminum. It's designed for model cars to do the bumpers, things like that. It's a self-adhesive foil, self-adhesive backed foil. It's very thin and delicate, so you got to be careful. You peel it off. You use a Q-tip to rub it down onto the surface. And then you use a very sharp X-Acto knife to trim it off. So I think it looks pretty cool. Gives it a little different metallic look than the rest of the ship. Makes it stand out. And it's easier than trying to paint it over top of the clear plastic. And possibly getting some on the rest of the canopy. So, okay. So I'm going to glue this in place because even though it does snap in place, it does tend to move around. I did have to fiddle with the figure a little bit and make him lower so he wouldn't be pressing up against the canopy, hitting with his head. So I had to trim off a little bit. So I glued him in place. So he's in there ready to go. And the cockpit's all ready to go. And what I had to end up doing, pretty much all of those side fiber optics were just in the way. There was no clearance at all on this for this to fit up in there. This whole entire upper part of the canopy or the cockpit has to go up into the ship. And there's no room at all for that to fit. So I had to cut all that off and sand it smooth again. I believe the red one on the bottom is still lit up, but the blue ones are not. So I'm not all that worried about it. They weren't that visible anyway. But now that I cleaned that up, it fits in there really nicely. And it goes up without any problems. So I'm ready to glue that in. I'm ready to glue the canopy in. Oh, I did finish the two front guns. Glued them in place. I did those in a gunmetal, so it'd be a little different. I have to glue this piece in. I did go back over, let me do this, different hand. I did go back over and I airbrushed some darker colors on these parts that are showing because they look that way in the show. And as I said a couple times, the key to this kit is many different metallics of different sheen, a little bit of the darker colors to bring out some character in it. I also did the back spine. I did it with some darker colors. I used a little bit of Alclad for some scorching. Then I went back over it with some pale burnt metal and some gunmetal. All right, I may touch that up a little bit. That looks a little too, well, we'll see. Maybe not. I can always do it once it's together. If anything, I can use some weathering powders on it to get some colors. I have to glue the engine in still. I did go back over it with some of the odorless thinner to take back off some of the more obvious oils that I had on there. And those have been on there for weeks. So just to kind of show you, I mean, it didn't take it all off, of course, but it took most of the stuff on the surface off. It just kind of reactivates it. It had already dried, so That's why I really like the oils, because you can do a lot with them. But it definitely gave this engine a really greasy, dirty look about it. That it's, you know, spewing out oil and things like that on the engine. And then I went over, I taped off, and I put some glue onto the aluminum tube and put some sand material, so that'll blend into the rest of the post that it goes onto. All right, so everything's ready to start putting together. The only thing I have to do painting wise, oh, and I did do oils on the internal pieces. I didn't do a whole lot of other stuff because you don't really see them much. You're just seeing bits and pieces, but you want to see it darker and more oily than the rest of the ship, because it's inside the ship and it's not supposed to be exposed. So those will get glued in. Grogu's ready to glue in. Actually, I was thinking one more thing. I was thinking of painting this extra interior that I made. I was thinking about making that a gray. I think I will. I think I'm going to go ahead and get some gray on that. I don't like the metallic look so much. It just blends in too much with everything else. So I think I'll do that as well. Because I have to put him in first before I can put one of these in. Probably the cockpit too. I should put him before I put the cockpit in. And then I have to get the wiring all set up before I'm ready to start gluing the two halves together. Oh, but one other thing I have to do is put on a little bit of yellow remaining paint right into here, across here, here, and over here. That indicated that they didn't finish sanding or buffing off all of the yellow paint. So, okay. All right, so I connected all the wiring underneath. So I have some wiring coming out of the brass tube, and then shrink tube together. See if I can show you up here. There's a little hole there that I 5-minute epoxied. And what I'm using is, I'm using remote control. I thought about drilling a hole through and putting the switch on the back of this, but I don't want to have that look obvious. So I have several of these right now in a little remote control. So all you need is a sensor sticking out, and it can be accessed with the remote control. So then I have the wires coming off of that to the battery. So let me go ahead and stick this down and we'll do a test. All right, so the remote control is pretty simple, the mechanism. You have a little black sensor that you want to put somewhere that will be able to be accessed by this. And it has a really good range, so it doesn't even have to be super obvious. I glued it in with 5-minute epoxy, and then I'll cover that with a few rocks and some material to blend it into the scenery, and it won't prevent it from getting the infrared light coming down through and turning it on. And so then that comes off and has a little circuit board, shrink tubed, and you have one set of leads that go to your lights and one set of leads that go to the battery. This is obviously the set that goes to the battery. So then all you do is and I still have a switch on the battery, so I can turn that on and off underneath. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to 5-minute epoxy this onto underneath this with the batteries facing down, so that'll be permanent, and I can just pick the base up, pull the batteries out, put new ones in. And I'll do the same with this. I'll 5-minute epoxy this onto the underside of this, so I can just click the button underneath and activate it. And then obviously I can just use the remote to turn on the lights. So what I did was I have just one set of leads coming up through this tube, and then I have a disconnect, and I'll show that here in a moment. So I can take this off, and right now I just have this wired into the engine, so I can show you the test for that. So let me move this around a bit, and then I'll turn it on. All right, and obviously the only thing I have wired in is the lower engine for the moment. So there's a little sensor, and I have this turned on. So you have remote control, and you have an on and off switch. There's actually a dim and a bright, which is cool, so you can change the intensity of the light for the different bulbs. I don't use it that often, but it's kind of cool if I need to. So let me go ahead and turn that on, show you how easily it works. There we go. Here's the engines. I can actually do dim, got dimmer, brighter. It doesn't actually go over the power that you're using, obviously, the 3 volts. It just has its own little controller within the circuit board to allow you to change that. And then just turn it back off. It's ready to go. All the lights will be wired to just one switch. Oops. I won't be having separate lights on this different switch, so I'll just turn it on in the back. So, okay. So the wiring's all done. I'm ready to go ahead and get that glued underneath. Let me take this off and show you the disconnect that I have. All right, so this pulls up out, and there is the quick connect. So you just have 2 different sides. They just snap apart. And then you just have to make sure to line up the red and the black, obviously. And then these just click apart. Let me take those apart and show you. All right, yeah, so you have a male end and a female end. I get these from Evan Designs. So what I'll be able to do, and there'll be some play in this, so this whole thing can pull out and go down in further, that kind of thing. So it gives me some room to move it. What I'll end up doing is having this glued up into the ship and just sticking down enough that I can connect it, and then I can push it back down into the area there, so it doesn't have to be sticking out. And that way it'll be there. I just want to make sure that I don't push it all the way down inside, of course, and get it stuck down in there, but I'd still be able to fish it out. Let me go ahead and click that together. Yeah, so then this fits into here, and the whole thing goes down in there. And there's some pretty good play, pretty good length in the aluminum tube up in the ship as well that covers this, so I'll have plenty of room to play with it. And disconnect the ship. I want to transport it. All right, we're down to the wire, including all the wires. Everything's done on top. I just have to glue on the other engine parts once everything's together. I got Grogu in his dome. I got Mando in the cockpit. Cockpit canopy's glued in place. Interior's glued in place. This is all glued in place. Everything's attached except the bottom hull and the top hull. So always makes me nervous because if something goes wrong, this is going to be a large surface to try to pry back off and get in. But everything's working. I tested the lights. Everything should be fine. I just have to be careful that none of the wires get crimped or anything. There's all the wires. I don't want to even get under there and show them all, but I had to keep adding a few extensions in order to have enough of a play to attach them onto the bottom thing where they have to go down through the bottom. And so I added some extra sections here and there. But everything is soldered together. Everything is shrink tubed, so it should be ready to go. So before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and put on the yellow markings, which you see right there. They actually have decals for these, but I'm not using them. But I might use them as sort of a reference as to kind of the size, how big they're going to be, that sort of thing. But I'm going to look at pictures from the show in order to get a better idea. And I'm just going to use a sponge and some paint. So let me get that done. And then what I'm going to do is turn this upside down. I have this nice fluffy sheet on here. So I'm going to turn this upside down so none of this gets damaged. And then the best approach, I think, is to put glue in the inner groove under here and then pop that up on top and just hold it down. It has a nice fit. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem. and I can use some little slower drying glue. So, all right. So I got the two halves connected. A little bit of trouble with the bottom going on. It always happens. Probably because of all the different wires in there. Something was pinching off, but I ended up getting it in. I had to use my Plastrec Bondine, which is the quick setting, really thin cement. And what I did was kind of press it down in and put it along the edge. So I marred up a little bit of the paint underneath, but nothing that you're going to really notice on here. And I can get that touched up again. But I wanted to go ahead and get it on the base and see how she's all finished. So I don't have the lights turned on yet, but I have a remote control as I showed. So let me go ahead and turn that on and show the final reveal. Very sweet. And of course I tested it before I did the video, or you wouldn't be seeing this. There'd be some screaming and stamping of feet and very, very much unpleasantries. That's why you test everything as you go. There's the engine underneath, glowing nicely. The engine's on the sides, and you can see the overspill on the front. Over there as well. See the controls in the cockpit, looking pretty cool. Of course, Mando and Grogu. Grogu with his little metal ball. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I did go ahead and put the little gear shift in his hand. I just used a piece of a very tiny bead of solder that I had left over and glued it into his hand. So he's in there hitting it against the glass stub. And hopefully doesn't break it so he doesn't go flying out into space. That would be a problem. There's the yellow extra paint that's on the ship. It looks different shades of yellow when the light hits it, of course. Let me show you a top view here. Really, really cool. I love this ship. I love the sleekness of it. I love the various spires and spines sticking back that just give it that sweeping motion. First when I saw it, it kind of looked like it was supposed to go this direction. But the more I got used to it, you know, you understand that it goes in this direction. But all the different shades of metallics and some of the darkened ones, the shiny, the more dull look, the weathered, oiled parts inside the machinery. Looking pretty cool. All right, let me go ahead and turn it and I'll show you from the other angle. All right, there it is from the back. Again, you can see the engine underneath. The nice glow from the backs of the two main engines. You can see the overspill of light glowing through. The cockpit controls get kind of washed out. All right, let me show you from the front. All right, there it is from the front. You can see the little bit of blue light spilling through the intakes. Intake fans, although it's a spaceship. I don't know why there would be fans pulling. There's no air in space, but whatever. We're not gonna go there. Looking pretty sweet. Nice angle. It almost looks like it's coming down from this angle, but it's really, if I come down lower, it's actually more level. All right, let me go ahead and turn it around to the front again. All right, so I'm holding it up so you can see a straight-on shot of it. See the profile of the ship, which looks pretty sweet. As Mando said, that's a lot of engine for such a small ship. Certainly is. You got your two big giant honking engines on the sides, your back engine, of course. This thing is really overpowered, but it flies like a bat out of hell. Sorry. See it flying over the desert bluff or whatever it is. All right, very cool. And one final thing, if you follow me on Instagram, I put a little humorous photo on there of this little toy that I got in. It's a pretty nice little toy of the N1 Starfighter. I put it up against the base, and I said it was way overestimated the size of this base. It even has landing gear, which the ship does not have. It's retractable. Has a little Grogu in the dome who cannot be removed. But you've got a Mando figure, which actually does have some very limited posing. He's sitting in there, but I'm not going to take him out. But you can bend his arms and his legs. Of course, open the cockpit and take him out. But pretty cool. Nice little toy ship. It's from Micro Galaxy Squadron. I got this off of Amazon. It was like $17. Not bad. Cool little ship. There's the posable figure. Grogu is not removable. They like to say that in there. It's like they have some other ones that they offer with some figures too. Pretty cool. All right. All right, so that's going to wrap up this build. Really happy with the Revell version of this kit, as I was with the Razor Crest, which I haven't built yet, but still a really great kit. So really happy with how they designed it, and the size of it is nice and big. Eagle-eyed viewers might notice that it's up on my wall here behind us. And I always do my intro and my outro at the end of the video. So if you go back and look at the beginning, you'll see that it's sitting up there, but you're not getting a real good shot of it. I kept that till the end. But really happy with this model, really happy with how it turned out, and all the modifications that I made on it. So highly recommend it if you can get your hands on this. It's definitely one of the very few versions, if not, I think it's the only version actually, other than some 3D printed versions and the toys, of course, like the little toy that I got. I don't think anybody else has released a model kit of it yet. But Revell's really been knocking it out of the park with a lot of the Star Wars kits since they got the license. It's just a shame that they don't have a US branch any longer, and you have to get it from other countries, or if you can get it from some US distributors if they get a couple of copies in. So, all right. Well, thank you to all my new subscribers, and stay tuned.